Hello, world. Welcome back to another YouTube Live with Spider Oak. I'm your host, Adam Turvitt, and today we're going to be talking about something a bit more refined, something classical, something that, we don't talk about enough in cybersecurity. That's Beethoven. All right, that probably sounds corny, but I want to tell you a little story about Beethoven and how this relates to cybersecurity. All right. So actually, last night I was thinking about this as I was listening to a really great recording. If you're a classical music fan, I highly recommend the Vienna Philharmonic with Carlos Kleiber, the Beethoven Symphony 5 and 7. I was listening to Movement 4 of Beethoven's Fifth last night, and it's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music that's intense and passionate. Beethoven is a unique composer, not only because he was prolific and his music was able to really change the whole footprint of classical music in the direction it was going, but also because Beethoven was able to make a huge transition in a personal way. He went completely deaf towards the beginning of his career. Generally speaking, being deaf makes it difficult to also be a musician. In my earlier life, I was a musician for quite a few years, and that's where my love for Beethoven comes from. I remember playing Beethoven's Fifth as a member of the bass section of the St. Joseph Symphony, and it's incredible music. To think that the person who composed that was already losing his hearing, or to think that the composer of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony had already lost his hearing. That's incredible to imagine. Now, one of the things that makes Beethoven so unique is that his deafness, rather than being a disability in his profession, it really became an advantage. Here's why. Oh, and uh, my kids always like to participate a little bit in these, so they found some Beethoven graphics that you might enjoy. This is a good Beethoven's Fifth joke. What's Beethoven's favorite fruit? Banana. All right. On with the show. On with the show. Thank you, Bugs. All right. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what happened to Beethoven after he lost his hearing. There is a really great article, opinion piece that was in the Washington Post, December 13th, 2019, by Arthur C. Brooks. And he talks about how losing his hearing affected Beethoven. Here's a couple of the things that he says. Deafness freed Beethoven as a composer because he no longer had society's soundtrack in his ears. Perhaps therein lies a lesson for each of us. He did not know the extent to which his radical new compositional style, heard only by others, would define him as truly great for hundreds of years after his death. Maybe he had a clue, however. It is significant that his Ninth Symphony closes triumphantly with the lines from Schiller's poem Ode to Joy. Joy, a spark of fire from heaven, daughter from Elysium, drunk with fire we dare to enter. Holy One, inside your shrine, your magic power binds together what we by custom wrench apart. All men will emerge as brothers, where you rest your gentle wings. Now, for Beethoven, losing his hearing meant he wasn't aware of all the musical trends going on around him. He became unaffected. He was thinking differently than all of the other composers that surrounded the music scene in his time. In terms of cybersecurity, we can take a great lesson from this. And it's really important because today, most of the applications of cybersecurity involve trying to fix something that's already broken. At Spider Oak, we take a little bit of a different tack. We believe that it is essential for you to have zero trust. Zero trust is defined as a security framework in which devices should not be trusted by default, even if they were previously verified. Now, the place that you are most likely to hear this idea of zero trust is when we're talking about network configurations. So within a local area network at a company, a zero trust network means that even devices that were previously added to the network by an administrator are not trusted by default. Nothing on the network is trusted by default. Now, we've taken this concept of zero trust in the network setting and applied it to everything we do. We assume not only a lack of trust, but active hostility from all the pieces of the ecosystem that our applications function in. So we don't assume that the server is friendly. We don't assume that the communication lines between a client and the servers are friendly. We assume they are all actively hostile. And because of this, it really affects the way that we set up all of our applications. Encryption is really essential in this, in the mix of this. We've decided that everybody is wrong in a lot of ways. Uh, Imagine it this way. Most applications today use reactive cybersecurity. Teams, Zoom, Dropbox. These are all great apps. They do great things. And most of them, especially as we saw with Zoom in 2020 when it became really popular, they said, turns out we have a security problem. We're going to try and fix that by adding some extra security in. They designed an application without security in mind, and so then they're forced to try and reactively increase security on an already insecure product. Pretty much all that happens in cybersecurity is this type of reactive cybersecurity. That's not to say these things are unimportant. Firewalls, two-factor authentication, these types of cybersecurity measures are important. And we're not saying you don't need those. But what we're saying is we follow a different path. We've decided that all of the cybersecurity and general security practices that we see out in the world, in the wild, are just insufficient. And so we start from a place of security and build our application from that place of security in a zero trust environment. So, it's the difference between a tank and I forget what those things are called, the pickup truck that they strap a machine gun onto. We're proactive in our security approach. And for you as a customer, that's really important to know that we're not assuming anything. We're not assuming that our data center is never going to be breached. We're not assuming that the people who have physical access to the servers are trustworthy. We don't even assume that you trust us. We assume you don't trust us. And we design our system so that you don't need to trust us. Let's look at this in a little bit more of a direct application. Your existing infrastructure, which includes networks and servers, or if you're using a SaaS product like Crossclave, where we control the infrastructure, that infrastructure in a traditional cybersecurity sense needs to be fully trusted for applications to work. This leads to things like insider threats. If a system administrator has full access to the infrastructure, they're able to go on and take plain text data. That's the Edward Snowden problem. If you have infrastructure that is actively adversarial, like for example, the Huawei, the 5G technology company from China, if you're using Huawei hardware, you have no guarantees that that hardware is not beaming data back to servers that are out of your control. Every few years, there's scares around hardware like this, hardware that's produced in countries that are actively launching cyber attacks against other nations, most notably China, but Iran and North Korea and others. In this type of situation where you can't trust the infrastructure, the devices that connect to the infrastructure are in a really tough situation. And not only do you need to worry about securing the devices, you also have to constantly worry about updating the infrastructure. Many of the really serious data breaches that we've seen have been the result of zero-day vulnerabilities that were on existing infrastructure that were not patched, even after patches were released, and then attackers were able to use those uh, problems with the infrastructure, the unpatched infrastructure, to get in and harvest massive amounts of data. We take a different tack. We assume that the infrastructure is bad. And so from the endpoint devices, we make sure that even if the data transmitted by those devices is exploited or intercepted, that data is encrypted and secured in such a way that should an adversary in the infrastructure have access to the data, it would be worthless to them. We do this through the power of encryption, where everything is encrypted before it leaves an endpoint device, and when it gets to the infrastructure, it stays encrypted. This is called end-to-end encryption, which is a term that you've probably heard quite a bit. End-to-end encryption is really important. It's not the whole recipe, but it's a really important part of the recipe of how we're able to take an actively hostile infrastructure and make sure that the endpoints and the devices that are on that infrastructure are able to maintain their security. So just a couple things I want to point out here. First, we work hard to protect data both in motion and at rest. That goes to the end-to-end encryption. Insider threats are largely eliminated in this model because the data that sits on the infrastructure is worthless without the keys which reside on the endpoint devices. The only thing that sits on the infrastructure are encrypted data blocks. One problem with many systems that use a lot of active encryption is that changing keys is hard. If you've ever used a PGP email encryption and lost your private key, you know how difficult a situation that is. So we've worked hard to make the hard parts of the encryption just work well in the background. But keys are derived from the user devices, not from the central infrastructure, so there's no chance of compromise. And we've done everything we can to make sure that you, as the user on the end, are protected in ways like dynamic key rotation. If a great example of this is in Crossclave, if you are in a space that has 3 people and you add a 4th person to that space, the keys are rotated using the public key of all 4 people that are in the space to derive a new key that's shared amongst the people in that space. Only someone who is part of that 4-key derivation is able to decrypt the data involved in that space. This includes other people within the broader team who are not a part of that space. A really important point here is, this is a software-only solution, which is important. We're not saying to be secure on your infrastructure, you need to buy our infrastructure. There are companies that do that, and there are situations that call for that. But for normal people, normal companies, or even companies in high security environments, it shouldn't be necessary for you to completely replace infrastructure in order to securely use that infrastructure. All right. So the best way for you to try out what I'm talking about here is to try out Crossclave. Crossclave is our application that we built on this zero knowledge base that allows us to keep user data safe in a new, novel way that really isn't used or recognized by the rest of the cybersecurity infrastructure. This is different. We thought about this in a completely different way. So we would love for you to try out Crossclave. Crossclave is free as part of our early adopter program. If you have not yet signed up for Crossclave, please go to spideroak.com/crossclave. If you go to the main spideroak.com site, you can get to our Crossclave page a number of different ways, but this is the URL to go to. You can learn more about Crossclave and click through to sign up for the free tier, which is available for early adopters. All we ask of the people on the free tier in the early adopter program, provide us with feedback. You can probably tell I'm really excited about this. Crossclave is a really revolutionary product, but we want to make it usable and something that helps with your workflow. We've done all that we can to make this a good product. Now we need your help by having you use it together with your team or your organization, and then tell us the things that we can do to make this better. We are super excited that over the last few weeks, we've had a huge influx of people trying Crossclave. We want you to be part of that. So please head over to spideroak.com/crossclave, sign up for the early adopter program, and get started on Crossclave for free. As always, if you have any questions or anything that I can answer for you or anybody on the Crossclave team, please leave a comment in this video, contact us through our website. We've got chat or email. However it is you reach out to us. We would love to talk with you about your use case and how zero trust software can make your life better. In the meantime, we'll go out with some Beethoven.